Welcome on, everyone. We're just about to get started here in just a second with the 2024 fire season outlook. Thanks so much for being on, Kerry. We have Kerry Jones on today, who's an air quality specialist and meteorologist with Forest Service. Really excited to kind of get some high quality information from you, Kerry. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gabe. I'll turn my, video on and say hello. I think thanks for the intro there, Gabe. I guess we'll also add that I'm now that we're kind of moving into our kind of the core critical portion of our fire season, helping out at the Southwest Coordination Center with Rich Naden doing the 7-day outlooks. So if you're not familiar, those are, and maybe I can put after we're done here a link in the chat if you're not familiar with the 7-day outlook that's what the Southwest Coordination Center produces. So we're kind of Rich and I are alternating weeks on that. And I think in the interest of my bandwidth, I'm going to shut my video back off and kind of roll with some slides. So are you seeing that, Gabe?
We can see it, Kerry.
Thanks. All right. So this is sort of an updated slide deck I presented at the Northern New Mexico Fire Summit last month. And so, I think maybe 20 minutes or so, leave some time for questions and kind of get into it. Kind of our, the too long didn't read portion of the presentation here is that kind of the takeaway message, the screaming message for this season is that our El Nino pattern is quickly fading. It's still hanging on, but it's weakening substantially. We do anticipate a La Nina pattern in place as we get into the summer, and that's likely going to extend, of course, into the fall and winter time. So La Nina is going to be back with us, unfortunately. And so that's obviously going to dictate a lot of what we are looking at in terms of our seasonal trends, especially as we get into the summer, but more so into the fall. So we are under the influence of El Nino likely through this month, through the month of May. We've seen kind of some evidence of that pattern here the last 3 to 4 weeks. I should note that the El Nino pattern that we had this past winter was the fourth strongest in about the last 40 years or so. And so we've had a total of 15 El Nino winters going back to 1950. And this was, again, in the top 5 in terms of strength. And it's actually the first El Nino winter spring that we've had since 2018, 2019. And so Rich and I look a lot at these, past seasons, past years with similar indices in the climate realm. And so spring of 2019, although not identical, of course, to what we're seeing this year, has been kind of an interesting year to look at. So as we go through the rest of spring, May, we're moving into our driest time of year, of course, in New Mexico. So when we say kind of a near normal May, that's not so informative because it's a dry month overall. But we do see some above average precip trends for northeastern New Mexico, especially as we get to the end of this week. And it only takes actually 1 or 2 good systems or good pattern shifts to drive our monthly precip for May above average. So we do see that for roughly the northeast third or so of the state. Temperatures pretty close to average, maybe slightly above, which kind of, we saw that in April, and we'll probably see that in May. And then we have some growing concerns, as we get into our sort of pre-monsoon period and even our core of our monsoon season, July, August, September, for a slightly delayed onset. And there's really, as I said, growing concern that we're going to have another drier than average monsoon season for New Mexico, which would be, unfortunately, kind of back-to-back years. So I don't know, I showed this up in Taos, and if you'll give me just a minute here to explain what you're looking at. So in New Mexico, we have eight climate divisions. Northern New Mexico, so most of the Santa Fe, the Carson National Forests are within Climate Division 2. And so if you kind of go back, rather than looking at month to month, I like to look at seasonal trends. And so what you see here, each dot represents a season going back to the spring of 2018. And then at the bottom there, I've highlighted the red boxes represent El Nino. So there's our last El Nino back in 1819. Then we had our 3 consecutive years of La Nina that I've boxed there in blue. And then our most recent El Nino here that started in spring of last year. So I've kind of highlighted with these boxes our winter seasons. So that would be December, January, February. And I just went back 4 seasons, so 4 winters. And interestingly, I mean, depending on where you live in northern New Mexico, last year might have been a wetter winter, both in terms of melted snow, rain and melted snow, and just in general snowpack. But overall, when you look at the division as a whole, this last winter that ended in February was actually slightly wetter than what we had in 22-23. So a couple of good back-to-back winters we've had. You can see there as we go back when we were in kind of the middle of this last La Nina stretch, both back-to-back winters, 2021 and 21-22 were below average. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. When you're at the top of this chart, that's near record wet. And then obviously when you're at the bottom, it's near record dry. So those are the boxes that represent our last 4 winters. Here you're looking at our last 4 springs. So by spring, that's March, April, and May. So we had a pretty decent March, April, May last year that was really driven by a pretty wet March. But overall, precip ended up above average last spring, which certainly kept our fire season mostly in check. There's the dreadful spring of 22 there at the bottom, and you can kind of see the other 2 years going back. So again, it kind of fits with our trends. Generally, when we're in La Nina, especially if we're into it in the spring, it's strong, likelihood of below average precip, March, April, and May. When we're in El Nino, it's just the opposite. In fact, you can see that spring of 19 was a very wet spring. Again, a very wet March of 2019. So there is some correlation there with our cool season precip and what's happening in the tropics. Kind of where things get off the tracks is summertime. And I know this time of year, what's the monsoon look like? How are things trending? And again, I'll kind of go on record just saying that there's not a lot of correlation, and there's certainly not a lot of published scientific literature that gives any confidence that you can predict the monsoon season based on whether you're in La Nina or El Nino. Last year was a very dry, record dry monsoon season, July and August, not just for northern New Mexico, for much of the Southwest. Of course, that followed a record wet monsoon. And when I say record, I'm talking, top 10. Top 10 wettest, monsoon of 22 was in that range. So extreme wet to extreme dry back to back. 21 was about average. And then 20, certainly where I live, 2020 monsoon was also very poor. In fact, it was even worse than last year. So again, we've seen these cycles, and I would attribute, this fractured monsoon season, it's shorter, just to our overall, climate change, the warming climate system, and how that's really disrupted our monsoon season overall. So I think we're probably seeing that as much as we're seeing any connection again to ENSO, the El Nino La Nina pattern. So with that, I'll just kind of highlight real quickly here, because we at least I focus a lot on precipitation when we do these outlooks. And this is kind of looking at our temperature anomalies. And I'll start a year ago. So this is March, April, May of 23. Again, a very cool spring, very wet March last year. That definitely helped in terms of our fire season last year. course, as we went into the summer, our very dry summer, and when it's dry during monsoon season, that just means less clouds, less rain, warmer than average temperatures. And that's exactly what played out for June, July, August last year. In fact, if I were to show July, August, September, this map would be deeply orange statewide. It was fall. We also had a very dry fall, notwithstanding, I think, well, actually, it was overall. I mean, we got into it in November, but October, September, dry months and warm. And then, of course, the winter, as I just showed you, was a good one for a lot of us in terms of the snowpack and some precip. Notwithstanding, I mean, December was really good. January was left a lot to be desired, and then we picked things back up in February and March. But overall, it was also a very warm winter.
Banana
with,
fire.
yeah. And then March was cooler than average across pretty much most areas of New Mexico, with some precip. And then April kind of went dry on us. In fact, it was a very dry, especially for north central New Mexico, it was a very dry April. Most areas less than 25-30% of average precip. And it was warmer than average. And then here we've had, of course, the system that we have today, but that's kind of been the trends in temperatures. I just captured the water year. I do provide this to the forest. So what you're looking at is back to October 1st of last year through yesterday. And you're just able to kind of see the effects of our dry fall and a couple of our drier months into the winter and then the spring, April especially. So, I mean, on this right here, I guess since we're talking mostly folks in northern New Mexico, that's the map. It's the same map, just zoomed in for Taos, Santa Fe, Albuquerque there at the bottom. So really, there are some pockets, kind of the west part of the Santa Fe. There's some pockets of at or above average precip if you go back to the water year beginning. But by and large, lots of orange shading on this map. So generally the precip since the water year less than 50% of average. And actually there's some areas out on the east slopes where it's closer to 10 to 25% of normal. So quite dry. So I would include, places I think like Cimarron up on the east slopes there down, extending south. So let's see here. I threw in a couple of snowpack graphics just for comparison. This kind of captures 14 snowtail sites in the Rio Chama, the upper Rio Grande Basin. This is not the headwaters of the Rio Grande, but just more on the New Mexico side. So the black line is current. The purple line is last year's trace. And then green, anywhere in the green shading would be considered close to the median for snowpack. Actually, how much water's in the snowpack. So you can see, we've obviously been losing a lot of our snowpack here the last 3 to 6 weeks, really since about the third week of March. It's come off pretty good. And then the headwaters in the Pecos, again, just a comparison to last year at this time, we're running about 10 to 14 days in terms of the melt off. In fact, we're a little bit in the headwaters. We're actually now a little bit below where we should be for the early part of May, and about, like I said, 12, maybe 14 days earlier than this time last year. As far as the drought goes, there is kind of the latest. Of course, these are updated weekly, as you all know, and it's kind of confusing. I apologize. I was trying to, again, focus in on Climate Division 2, which is the Northern Mountains. And the point here is that over 90% of Climate Division 2 is in moderate or severe drought. If you do the numbers, that's about 92% of Climate Division 2 in moderate or severe drought. That's up significant. I mean, the moderate drought has increased 36% since this time last year. Severe drought's up 30%. compared to the same time last year. We don't have any extreme drought, which is the red, and then the deep red or the maroon color that you see down in the southeast. That's exceptional drought. So at least we don't have that designated anywhere in northern New Mexico, but certainly from a drought perspective, we're going into this fire season definitely worse off than we did this time last year. And there's the change. This is 52 weeks. This is a change from this time last year with, you can see kind of that degradation by 2 to 3 classes there from Taos down to Santa Fe towards Albuquerque in those areas. Okay, I'll kind of quickly go through this. I think with I highlighted the 2 dry monsoon seasons, 2020 and of course last year. And depending on, where you're at exactly, but it was definitely right around 4th, 5th, 6th driest on record. And that record goes back 129 years. The 22 monsoon was in the top 10 wettest. 21 was, like I said, it was just a little bit above average. And that affects our fine fuels. And so this is somewhat of an older chart, but it just kind of highlights where we've seen the biggest percent change in fine fuels or grass fuel type. And so where you see the green shades, that's where the fine fuel loading is significantly higher than it was last year at this time. Where you see the brown shades, and that's kind of mostly focused over the southern lowlands, the southern deserts into the southeast plains, where there just wasn't a lot of fine fuel growth given our dry summer last year. So there's not a lot of additional fuel that we added to the system. But we definitely, up across the northeast part of the state, probably the east slopes of the northern Sangre de Cristos, and then you can see some other areas there in the southwest where there's more concern this year than there was last. Okay, kind of shifting gears then, let's talk about our fading El Nino pattern. This is the latest. These are updated monthly. And I think by the time we get into the late part of this month and into early June, we'll be within kind of striking distance of at least a weak La Nina. And then you can see as we go through the summer into the fall that we're into potentially a moderate La Nina that's in the second shade of blue. I think if there's any, silver lining, it's that the dynamical models that we look at kind of show that the pattern may peak kind of late fall, and we might start to get back closer to neutral status, sometime during the winter, this next winter. So that's good news. I should say La Nina is not good news, but the fact that it's not going to get super, super strong as we get into the fall, which is when it typically peaks in strength, is good. So, but that's the outlook. There's the official NOAA forecast showing a better than 80% probability of La Nina for late summer and fall. So again, we pay close attention to this because La Nina loads the dice, not in our favor with dry, cool seasons, winter and spring times. So here's some of the model output. We will get, this updated model. This is a North American ensemble model that Rich and I look at, and it'll be out. The new maps will be coming out actually any day, probably the end of this week. We don't anticipate a lot of change to this, but you'll see that as we cross the top, that's our temp anomalies. And you can see that they just get warmer as we go through. And of course, this is our warmest time of year, hottest time of year as we get into June, early July. So when you see red on the models indicating above average temperatures for our hottest time, that's not a good trend. And then similarly on the precip anomalies across the bottom, kind of hanging on. These maps, by the way, were produced over a month ago. And so it's interesting that even back when we were updating, last month, that the models were kind of highlighting that northeast third of New Mexico for above average precip. And I think, as I said, the end of this week, we're going to start chipping away at some of the deficits there. And then you can see the signal for June and July, it just rapidly changes, right? Because we're going in this transition period coming out of El Nino into La Nina, and the atmosphere starts to respond, and there you see it. So this is a very concerning trend. We're hoping that some of the red that you see there in July, it starts to kind of shrink a little bit. But even as you get into northern Mexico, sort of northeastern Sonora, kind of in the core monsoon region, when you see deep reds in July, that's just, it's not a good sign. So that's the models. And I'll just kind of go through the official NOAA outlooks. Hopefully you all, these are updated monthly if you keep tabs on it. So this is the month of May. This was the last outlook for May that was issued 3 weeks ago now. Kind of highlighting the expanding below average precip potential across western New Mexico, eastern Arizona, above average signal for temperatures in eastern 2/3 of New Mexico for the month of May. And then as we go into, oh, I'm sorry, I had the wrong, there we go. I was like, I had the two wrong. I was just comparing the earlier outlook with the most recent. This is the most recent. I thought, gosh, yeah. So the most recent outlook for May was issued at the end of April. So that was last week, basically. So you can see that not a lot of change, honestly. You can still, the below average signal for precip focused across far eastern Arizona, New Mexico, with the above average signal for temperatures across the eastern half or so of the state. So that's for May. As we get into May, June, and July, so this is more focused during the month of June. You can see that the below average signal for precip really starts to stand out squarely over New Mexico, with above average temperatures just further expanding, which kind of fits in line with what the model data is suggesting as well. And then as we look at June, July, and August, again, our core monsoon months, this is sort of where the concern continues to grow. I have a couple of other slides that I'll kind of highlight some of our past years that might give us some hope that areas, west of the divide, like Arizona, may squeeze out, an okay monsoon season. But historically, right now, at least for northern New Mexico, the odds are stacked against us. So, and then there's August, September, October. So, yeah, this was actually, I think I may have mentioned to Gabe, but if you go on the SWIC website, these are outlooks that are also issued and updated monthly. This is what Rich and I kind of focus on. And this is our take, just looking at everything that we pull into our system and, do our best to kind of add a little bit of value to the seasonal outlooks for the Southwest. But it's basically the same message, pretty variable, at least for the month of May. And then you can see the dry signal starts to really expand as we get into June. And then I will say that Rich is a little bit more bullish on at least a maybe average monsoon for Arizona west of the divide. So you can see evidence of there in July. But I think for most of us in New Mexico, we're going to be left wanting a much better monsoon than I think what all the indications are pointing towards. So, and here's kind of why we say that. Well, I thought I had the monsoon slide in here. Let me first say real quick on wind. So we do have some skill when it comes to looking at wind events in April and May. Whether you're in El Nino or whether you're in La Nina. So on the left there, if we take all of our past moderate to strong El Ninos, our springtime winds are definitely below average historically, meaning that we always get wind in April and May. We're not seeing that, but the number of big back-to-back events is definitely below average. And I think we've seen that this lingering, even though it's fading, that El Nino has kept kind of overall our wind events in check. Just the opposite, though, when La Nina is with us, as it was in 22, as it was in 2011, well above average in terms of wind events for the Southern Rockies, New Mexico included. So when we came out back in February with kind of our wind outlook, this was kind of what we came up with. So slightly above average, which is that first shade of green. The colors are odd, but that first shade of green would be slightly above average, close to average for April and May, and then a little bit windier as you got up into Colorado. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, we still have another 3 weeks to go in May, but generally as we get towards Memorial Day, our wind events really start to taper off historically. And then this is kind of what I'll end on, is just our monsoon season is, as I said, from a model standpoint, is not looking good. That's that latest ensemble there in the middle. But if we start pulling past years, and so the image on the left there includes, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 years in the past where things are kind of similar to what we see playing out this summer. And again, I apologize for the color choice there, but the first shade of green is below average. So even historically, when we pull out years, it hasn't been good for July, August, September. So when you put all three of those charts together, kind of historically what we've seen in the past, what the model is showing, and then what the official outlook from NOAA has been highlighting really for the past, 3-4 months, is just is a dry pattern for New Mexico. And as I said, I think Rich, leaning on this image on the left, is saying maybe Arizona kind of squeaks out kind of an average monsoon. The model certainly doesn't support that, and nor does the official outlook. But I think historical context does provide some instructive input to the season. So we'll see. Yeah, and I guess maybe in the interest of time, I guess it's coming up on noon. I can answer any questions. That was pretty much get to the summary slide, which is this one here. So there's these just came out actually a couple days ago, last Friday. So there's our outlook for June. You can see that it's mostly focused on the Rio Grande Valley, lower elevations, southern New Mexico into southeast and central Arizona. And again, this is significant wildland fire potential, not initial attack, which is pretty much what we've seen thus far. Although I guess the fire down by Alamogordo was close to 100, I believe, acres, but nonetheless. And then as we go through July, things expand, unfortunately. And of course, if we get lightning, as we've had with a couple of these systems, and that new start we had up in the Pecos, that's a little concerning for July. And then August, again, anticipating maybe an average monsoon for Arizona that maybe kind of bleeds into far western New Mexico, but by and large, above normal potential there, even into the heart of our monsoon season. So, gosh, yeah. All right. With that, Gabe, I'll turn it back to you. I'll stop sharing. I hope that is some detail you were looking for.
Kerry, that was really great. Thank you so much for sharing so much information in a short period of time. We're right at the top of the hour, so folks have to drop off. Thanks for hopping on and joining us. I just had one question, which was, it looks like your outlook just goes through August, but do you have any thoughts on how this might relate to finding burn windows for prescribed fire in the fall?
Well, yeah. So, yeah, Rachel, I think that's a really, it helps. I will say that. Now, the one caveat is obviously with our moisture, if we get some timely intrusions of moisture, say, as we get into obviously into the monsoon season, but more so maybe just towards the end of it, that's going to be the key because generally, and I didn't throw that slide in there, but as we get deeper into a La Nina pattern, that's, we tend to be very dry. And if we get wind, right, that could really shut down those windows. So I think it's really going to be tied to fuel moistures and if they stay in prescription, if we have a dry summer. So I think that's, yeah, there definitely would be windows, but it just may be too dry.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Eitan here. I uh, uh, maybe a little bit more optimistic than Rachel's question about being too dry to burn in the fall. If people are looking to plant trees this season, um, any thoughts on that? I mean, I guess wait and see what the monsoons do, and then make some more concrete plans. I don't know. Do you have any
Yeah, and I
recommendations?
mean, I've been working with the forest staff on that actual very question because I don't, mortality, um, I think has been high. Even I think it might have just been some other factors unrelated to soil moisture, but I guess it's just a question of how long can we stretch out the soil moistures from our decent winter and spring, as we're going through our snow melt season here. How long can we carry that into what will potentially be kind of a dry stretch, as you said, getting into the monsoon season? So it may just be, as you said, kind of a wait and see. If we get, here's the thing about the monsoon season, right? 1 or 2 good weeks can really turn things pretty quickly, right? So we'll see how that may or may not play out, but I think that's what it would hinge on. But I think generally as you get into September, October, November during a La Nina, even if it's kind of moderate, that's historically dry. Especially October can be a very dry month. So in general, yeah, I think it's going to be kind of touch and go. That's what I think.
Alrighty, so I want to respect everyone's time. I know we're going to have to jump off here.
Yeah.
Want to thank Gabe for setting this up, and thank you so much, Kerry, for
All
coming on
right.
and
Yeah.
doing this
Thanks,
again.
everyone.